Okay. We're going to move on to private members' business. And motion read the National Maternity Hospital Shin Tarishkint Module Hospital Morticus Noshunta. And I'm calling on Deputy Roisin Shortall to move the motion.
I move the motion. Thank you, Lascan Corlia. The decision to co-locate the National Maternity Hospital with St Vincent's has had a long and tortuous history. When the plan was announced in 2013, there were three overriding concerns: ownership, governance and religious ethos. The same concerns remain today. Nothing that has happened in the interim has done anything to dispel them. For a long time, this government and the last refused to concede any problems existed. They said all that was needed was time and a legal framework, and the matter would be resolved. In May 2017, Simon Harris promised we would have a legal framework, quote, in the coming month. In 2019, Leo Varadkar assured this House the details of the legal transfer would be resolved over the next couple of weeks. The current Minister, Stephen Donnelly, gave similar assurances last year. This charade came to an end last week when the Taoiseach finally admitted the blindingly obvious: the deal is fundamentally, potentially fatally flawed. Where did it all go wrong then? The obvious place to start is 2016 and the mediated agreement that was hammered out between the two hospitals, St Vincent's and the National Maternity Hospital in Holles Street. It concluded the new National Maternity Hospital would become a wholly owned subsidiary of St Vincent's. It was no longer co-location, but full integration, essentially a takeover. Private interests were represented in this mediation, but what about the public interest? That was conspicuous by its absence. The deal was silent on safeguarding a valuable public investment, ensuring a secular ethos, or mandating public governance of a public hospital. Handing over a valuable public asset to a private religious entity was deemed the reasonable, even sensible thing to do. The public felt very differently and made their feelings known with large public protests. The Sisters of Charity then announced their intention to withdraw from St Vincent's Healthcare Group. They said they would no longer be involved in the ownership or management of the National Maternity Hospital and would set up a holding company into which they would transfer their shareholding in St Vincent's Healthcare Group. While this holding company has been incorporated as a private company with charitable status, as of today, the sisters have not transferred their shareholding to this holding company. It should also be noted that, having said they would gift the site to the Irish people, they gifted it to their own holding company. The proposed new corporate structure of this deal bears further scrutiny. It entails 3 tiers. At the top is the holding company, whose directors are self-appointed. They will be the sole shareholders of the entire St Vincent's operation, and they can stay in office for up to 14 years. Below this unaccountable company will be the St Vincent's Healthcare Group, which will oversee 4 hospitals, including the proposed new National Maternity Hospital. And below that again will be the National Maternity Hospital Board with its own 4 directors nominated from St Vincent's and 1 ministerial nominee. The deal is manifestly bad for the public. The public pays the construction costs, equipment costs, staff costs and maintenance costs. In return, St Vincent's Holdings graciously retains ownership of the site and control of the governance structures. The deal not only flies in the face of reason and rationality, it is also in direct contravention of a government report by Catherine Day on publicly funded health services. That report is unambiguous. It says, where the state decides to build any new hospital or facility, it should endeavour to ensure it owns the land on which the hospital or facility is built. The report goes on to say, where the state is unable to secure the purchase of land, any capital investment by the state should only be provided subject to prior agreement on the exact services that will be delivered. Crucially, the report concludes that legally the state cannot compel private Catholic entities to provide services that are contrary to their ethos. Remarkably, this deal fails every limb of this test. The state does not own the land and has no means of ensuring the full range of reproductive and sexual health services currently available in Ireland, and that they are provided by the hospital. Which brings me to religious ethos. The Sisters of Charity proposal to transfer their shareholding into St Vincent's Holdings required Vatican approval and is subject to canon law. This obligation requires the nuns to ensure they avoid harm to the Church in the transfer. In this case, harm expressly includes activity which gives rise to grave harm to ecclesiastical teaching. It is not disputed the Catholic Church does not sanction the full range of reproductive and sexual health services that are legal in Ireland. The Catholic Church stands firmly against abortion, which it calls a grave sin. It has judged in vitro fertilization as immoral. It opposes same-sex relationships, rejects the existence of transgender people, and condemns gender reassignment surgery. We know canon law will be followed during the sisters' transfer of their shareholding. But what about future governance? The Constitution of St Vincent's Holdings espouses the same core values of Mother Mary Aikenhead, the founder of the Sisters of Charity. In 2017, the St Vincent's Healthcare Group annual report stated what future directors of St Vincent's Holdings will be obliged to do, and that is that they will be obliged to uphold the values and vision of Mother Mary Aikenhead. The government may deny Catholic values will persist at the new hospital, but that is what the corporate structure is designed to facilitate. The continuation of the ethical code of the Sisters of Charity, not only for the 3 existing hospitals in the group, but also for the new National Maternity Hospital. When the government was negotiating this deal, it is now clear that the parties were mismatched. It was a David and Goliath situation, and the sisters were not diminutive. It is not the first time they have run rings around the Irish government. When the sisters built St Vincent's at Ellen Park, they did so with public money. Not only did they use public money, they negotiated a deal whereby the state would have no involvement in the control and management of the hospital, despite the more than €5 million, or pounds at that stage, the order received between 1934 and 1969, when Ellen Park opened. There was also another proviso, that if the sisters sold their old hospital at St Stephen's Green, the proceeds would be given to the state via the Hospital Trust Fund. Predictably, that never happened. The sisters did sell the old hospital, but the proceeds were never handed over. Commenting on that deal in the Dáil in 1972, Noel Brown said, and I quote, "Surely this is an extraordinary principle to permit, that an organisation, I do not care who they are, whether they're religious orders or others, should be allowed to sell off property, keep the money, and then be given a 100% grant to build a new hospital." I wonder what Dr. Brown would have to say about this current quagmire. I think most of us can guess. Noel Brown spent his political life trying to disentangle the Church from the provision of healthcare services and to create a proper public health service. It is extraordinary that this House, all these years later, is still convulsed by the exact same issues. The state's record on the provision of public services is a long litany of failure. The new National Maternity Hospital is a chance to finally get it right. It will be a public hospital paid for by the people. There is no justification whatsoever for the ownership and the governance structures to be in the hands of a private company. And I'd now like to pass over to my colleagues, Deputy Whitmore and Deputy Kearns. Thank you.
Thank you, Lascian Corla. Minister, after everything that women past and present have gone through in this country to defend the right to healthcare, it is an absolute fallacy to believe that it is possible for a privately controlled hospital built on Catholic lands, founded under a Catholic ethos, that they will provide healthcare that is based solely on medical science and that religious ethos will not influence it in any shape or form. The vote to repeal the 8th could not have been clearer. Women and men in Ireland will not allow for their health and that of their loved ones to be dictated by any organisation that places ethos above science. For women in my constituency of Wicklow, the new National Maternity Hospital will be the hospital they will go to for maternity services. And I get many emails, as I'm sure you do, Minister, on this issue. They are very, very concerned that the government seems intent on making the same mistakes of the past, not learning from them and walking straight into another scandal in the provision of women's healthcare in this country. Many ask, after repeal of the 8th, after the treatment of women in the mother and baby homes, can this government seriously consider gifting an £800 million publicly funded new National Maternity Hospital to a private company established by the Religious Sisters of Charity? In December 2018, the then Health Minister Simon Harris insisted during Dáil questions that I am not giving any hospital to the nuns. 3 years later, and the nuns still hold the keys and the control to this hospital, despite what they say. And I'm going to read now from the statement that the St Vincent's Hospital Group made in the last day or two. They say that the new National Maternity Hospital will be clinically independent. Clinically independent from whom, Minister? From the HSE? They say there will be no religious or Vatican influence. If that is the case, Minister, it will be an absolute miracle, because no land anywhere in the world provides for healthcare that goes against the ethos of the Catholic Church if it is owned by the Catholic Church. They say that all medical procedures will be provided in accordance with the laws of the land. Minister, in 2017, the Mater Hospital was in the media because they would not even provide prescriptions for contraceptives. And at the time, the HSC said they would not get involved or intervene in that because it was a matter for the matter itself as a private institution. The St Vincent Hospital Group also say that for the delivery, that they need to own this site for the delivery of integrated patient care on the Elm Park campus. It beggars belief that they think we're going to fall for that, to be honest, Minister, that they can provide integrated care if it's a 150-year lease, but they can't do it if the state owns it. Doesn't make any sense, Minister. So the question that you need to ask, and that we all need to ask, is why? Why does the Church and the nuns, why do they want this complex structure? Why will they not just gift it to the state as they promised? And I think it's clear, Minister, that this is about power and ethos and not about healthcare. I also listened to your radio interviews this morning, Minister, and I just have a few things to say about that. Minister, women do not want tea and sympathy in relation to this issue. We do not want to hear that you understand our concerns. We want action. We want to see this resolved once and for all. We want the healthcare that is based on science and will put our needs before that of a religious organisation. We will not be fobbed off by an extra 50 years on a 100-year lease. We will not be fobbed off by so-called state or ironclad guarantees. Because as you said yourself this morning, Minister, there is no solution that will keep all the stakeholders happy. That is because the government is trying to square a circle here that is not going to be possible, Minister. You've also said that it is not conducive to enter these negotiations with a red line in mind. Minister, I say to you, you absolutely have to enter these negotiations with a red line in mind, and that red line is our healthcare. You cannot go in and negotiate away our rights to our healthcare. And it must be a red line. And if you do not believe that is a red line, Minister, I would ask that you send somebody else to negotiate with the nuns. We refuse to fall foul to power plays any longer. We refuse for our healthcare to be up for discussion or negotiation. It absolutely must be based on science and on medical need. Now, Minister, there is no wrong time to admit that you've made a mistake, and I believe the government must admit that they've made a mistake with this and do the right thing for women and their families in this country. Thank you.
Holly Cairns.
Thank you, Lascan Corda. The story of maternal health care in Ireland is the story of how we have treated women in this country. It's far from a happy story, it's a lot closer to a horror story. Irish maternal health care was a place where misogyny reigned, where women were defined solely in terms of their reproductive functions and where they were denied control of themselves, their bodies and their lives. In the early days of the Free State, as the Dáil limited women's opportunity in public life, we had disgracefully high maternal and infant mortality rates. Maternity services were under-resourced, and the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1935 made the use of contraception a criminal offence, an actual criminal offence. A twisted version of Catholic morality and Irish misogyny created the mother and baby homes, a system of church-run, state-funded institutions in every county which intentionally incarcerated, abused and dehumanised women and girls for being pregnant. It punished rape victims, women with disabilities and women from disadvantaged groups, while rapists, predators and men of good character washed their hands. The system, administered in many cases by nuns, abused generations of girls and women and led to the death of thousands of infants and young children. This included the Religious Sisters of Charity who ran Magdalene laundries and residential institutions for children. We are still dealing with the legacy of these abuses and as the state rallies to limit survivors' rights, their access to the truth and proper redress. In the late 1940s, Dr. Noel Brown's Mother and Child Scheme aimed to reduce high rates of child mortality by modernising healthcare and providing free services for mothers and children. This chance of real progress to save lives and help empower women was strongly opposed by the Catholic Church and the Irish Medical Association and many of Brown's colleagues. Preempting liberalisation and secularity in Irish society, lay Catholic organisations pushed for the Eighth Amendment, which introduced one of the most oppressive abortion regimes in the Western countries. For 35 years, it not only restricted bodily autonomy, but it caused immeasurable damage and suffering. It was only thanks to the activism and dogged determination of women that it was repealed. Politicians delayed and obstructed, opposing even giving Irish people a vote until the pressure was too much for them to hold back. Despite the historic victory for women's rights, we know women still have to travel long distances, especially women from rural areas for medical terminations, and families are still forced to go to the UK for care when they need terminations for medical reasons. These barriers are even greater for young people, people with disabilities and women from minority groups. We are still living in the remnants of this history. It is not in the past, it is in the present. Much of our health and educational infrastructure is still controlled by the Roman Catholic Church, which has limited people's access to procedures and even information. Our motion is a reminder that this struggle for women's healthcare continues today. It may not be as acute, but many of the fundamental points remain the same. Do we want a system based on medical science and the informed decision-making of individuals, or do we want one that prioritises harmful religious teachings? Women's healthcare is still overlooked. Take the government's failure to ensure the consistent easing of restriction in maternity hospitals, Deputy Catherine Connolly's motion on highlighting the need for an implementation plan for the National Maternity Strategy 2016 to 2026, or the fact that the INMO have consistently highlighted that our midwife to birth ratio is much higher than it should be. Women's healthcare is still restricted. In religiously controlled settings, the morning after pill, IVF, abortion and vasectomies and sterilisations and trans healthcare are all obstructed. Perfectly standard, normal and necessary healthcare is banned because of religious teachings. This is not just practices of the 1930s or the restrictions of extremist regimes. It is the reality in Ireland today, and this is unbelievable. Women's healthcare needs to be legally guaranteed with absolute certainty. We allow for the hard-won rights of individuals to be chipped away or denied. We need the National Maternity Hospital to be fully owned and run by the state. The situation is complex, yes, but the situation has been made complex. The Sisters of Charity wanted full ownership of public hospitals. After public pressure, they have set up a separate company with self-appointed directors who will be bound by religious ethos. Legally, this separates the nuns from control of the site, but in a practical sense, their control will remain and dominate. The just and decent thing would be for the Sisters of Charity to give the land to the women of Ireland in reparations. But if they will not do the moral thing, the government must itself ensure public ownership and state governance. For a horrifyingly long time, this country was run on shame, and it was a powerful force. Shame was weaponised against women and girls for the so-called crime of getting pregnant, and that shame still lingers. Shame and religious control has no place in the future of maternal health care in this country. Our new National Maternity Hospital must be publicly owned and wholly secular. Irish women have fought too hard and too long for anything less.
I'd like to thank the deputies for raising today's very important issue through the motion. The government will not be opposing the motion, and I hope to address now the various points raised in that motion and to outline the huge amount of work done so far to make this hospital a reality. All 4 standalone maternity hospitals, while they have incredible staff and provide a superb service, the hospitals themselves are now outdated. The buildings do not cater for the needs of modern maternity care. Today's debate specifically concerns the National Maternity Hospital, the NMH, currently located at Holles Street, and the starting point for the National Maternity Hospital is this. Women, mums and babies urgently need a new modern maternity hospital. The hospital should be co-located with a major adult teaching hospital to ensure the best possible care and continuity of care for women. The hospital must have clinical and operational independence and provide the full range of healthcare services to women. Co-locating the National Maternity Hospital with St Vincent's University Hospital makes sense. Granting the operating licence to the National Maternity Hospital to operate the maternity hospital makes sense. Detailed design is complete, including physically connecting the new hospital with St Vincent's University Hospital. Planning permission for the new hospital was secured in 2007. The contract for enabling works was awarded in 2018, and a full business case has been prepared to support the final investment decision. While the capital project has progressed significantly, the ownership and governance arrangements have proven complex. This is largely due to the National Maternity Hospital and St Vincent's being independent voluntary hospitals. I fully recognise that some people have very genuine concerns regarding the ownership and the clinical independence of the new National Maternity Hospital, and these concerns must be addressed. Significant work has been undertaken and continues to be undertaken in this regard. As the first phase of that work, the Minister for Health in 2016, Simon Harris, appointed Kieran Mulvey to mediate between the hospitals. The Mulvey Agreement was finalised following an extensive mediation process between the National Maternity Hospital and St Vincent's Healthcare Group, and the agreement was published in 2017. It provides for the establishment of a new company, the National Maternity Hospital at Elm Park, which will have clinical, operational, financial and budgetary independence in the provision of maternity, gynaecology and neonatal services. Following from the Mulvey Agreement, a draft legal framework has been developed to copper fasten these arrangements and to address the state's core objectives. Firstly, to ensure all clinically appropriate services that are legally permitted are provided for women who need them in the new National Maternity Hospital, and to prevent any undue influence, religious or otherwise, in the operation of the new hospital. And secondly, to protect the state's investment for the public good. As noted by government in 2017, then Minister for Health Simon Harris formally asked St Vincent's Healthcare Group to consider an outright site transfer. However, this was not agreed, and the current position is that the draft framework provides that the new hospital will be owned by the state and will be built on a site to be held on a lease by the state for a period of 99 years. And as colleagues will be aware, an extension was agreed earlier this year for an additional 50 years, so essentially a 149-year lease. The HSC would in turn provide an operating licence to the National Maternity Hospital to facilitate the provision of health services in that building. Nonetheless, as I have previously stated, it is my preference, it is my strong preference, that the hospital would be built on land owned by the state. And I'd like to assure deputies and everyone who is interested in this topic that all options continue to be explored, and I intend to engage further with the stakeholders in that regard. Questions have been raised as to any potential future involvement of the Religious Sisters of Charity in the National Maternity Hospital. The Sisters of Charity will not play any role in the governance or in the operation of the National Maternity Hospital. It has been confirmed to me that the sisters have resigned from the St Vincent's Healthcare Group board and have secured Vatican approval to the proposed transfer of their shareholding to a new charitable entity, St Vincent's Holdings. Under the terms of their service level agreement, St Vincent's Group requires the consent of the HSC to the share transfer, and the HSC intends for that to take place in the context of finalising the draft legal framework. The government structures continue to be examined closely by the Department of Health and by the HSC, and I'd like to state again that I will only bring a recommendation to government on the governance structures of the National Maternity Hospital if I have a clear confirmation, unambiguous, absolutely watertight confirmation as to the full clinical and operational independence of the National Maternity Hospital. It is certainly the case that full independence can be achieved without owning the land. Many primary care centres around Ireland are in buildings and on land owned by third parties, and nobody would reasonably suggest that those landlords could dictate what services GPs and clinicians could or could not provide within those buildings. Let me say that I understand very clearly the concerns raised in relation to the NMH, and we are well aware, I think as has been very appropriately stated by the previous contributors, that women in Ireland have been failed in the past when it comes to health, particularly to sexual and reproductive health. That's why delivering the new National Maternity Hospital relocation project is crucial. It's why we must continue our efforts to bring the project to the next phase, and with all of the necessary assurance in relation to the services to be provided for women. I believe Ireland needs a revolution in women's healthcare. And in spite of COVID, a lot of good work is happening. This year, the National Maternity Strategy was fully funded for the first time. It was a 5-fold increase in funding, meaning more choice for women, more midwifery-led care, more specialist care, amongst other improvements set out in the maternity strategy. 24 more lactation consultants are being funded and hired. A specialist endometriosis clinic is being established. Legislation on surrogacy is being prioritised. For the first time, a women's health lead has been funded at the Irish College of General Practitioners, who will look specifically at women's health within general practice. 2 new regional fertility hubs are being set up in Neenah and in Galway. We're establishing, or in some cases expanding, services across 9 see and treat gynaecology clinics this year. They're in Dublin, Drogheda, Waterford, Wexford, Letterkenny, Kerry, Mayo and Portlaoise. These will provide same-day services for women across multiple clinical areas. The Women's Health Task Force is being funded to continue and expand on its excellent work, and policies are being developed in consultation with the task force in areas including menopause, wellness and mental health. And of course, we want to get going on the building of a state-of-the-art modern national maternity hospital. It's an essential part of our plan to build women's healthcare services to the level that they need to be at and that has been needed for so long. Providing the necessary infrastructure and environment to realise our common goal, women-centred, modern, safe, quality healthcare for women and their families that is delivered with compassion and with dignity. Thank you, Lascan Corla.
The Social Democrats. Ich habe die Kino Callahan.
Lascan Corla. And I have to say I'm more concerned now, having heard the Minister's comments, and in particular concerned that the Minister has said that in relation to the nuns not having any more involvement, that he takes some assurance in that. And for quite some time we've been saying that one of the key issues here is the company set up by the nuns with their ethos and with their values, and the role that that company will play. And that's been a key concern that people have raised. So not that the nuns were withdrawing, but actually the manner in which they're withdrawing and the manner in which they're doing that handover to reflect their ethos and their values. That's a very, very key concern that we've been raising. And the Minister hasn't addressed that. The Minister, in fact, seems to take assurance from the very point that we are raising as a very key concern. This isn't, Lascan Corla, this isn't complicated, or at least it shouldn't be complicated. This is about ensuring that in terms of the National Maternity Hospital that we pay for as taxpayers, that we should own it. And that's what the situation, that's what the outcome should be. There should be full public control, full ownership, and there should be no questions and no ambiguity relation to that. And Cathaoirleach, if we are to remove all doubt on that, there's one way to do that, which is insist on full public ownership. And we wouldn't have this situation of complex arrangements that the Minister refers to, and the hope that that the result of that will be unambiguous in terms of running this hospital. Let's remove all doubt from the situation, and let's ensure that there is full public ownership and that there isn't any complex arrangements or otherwise, or any of those concerns, so we can draw a line in the sand on this. Fundamental on this is the question, a core question, of are we content to continue to outsource healthcare to private entities, or will we insist once and for all that hospitals built with state funds will be in full public ownership and full public control? There couldn't be a more important question for us to answer in relation to healthcare. And we have to ask, why are we in a situation where the state would even contemplate settling for an arrangement of anything less without full ownership? How are we in such a situation? How can the government be thinking about spending in the region of €800 million of our money on the National Maternity Hospital without having full public ownership and control? This is a question about who runs the state and about who is the state run for. Is it run in terms of ameliorating private interests, or is it run in the interests of the public? And as Deputy Shortall and Deputy Cairns said before, this isn't just an issue that's arisen since 2013. This is an issue that's been with us over the last 100 years since the foundation of the state. We saw it most, in the early 1950s with the Mother and Child Scheme that Noel Browne tried to progress, which was all about maternity services and healthcare. We saw it at that point, and it's incredible that 70 years later that we are still having a discussion in the Dáil about private interests and the role that they play and how they are shaping the way that publicly funded healthcare will be delivered. And now is clearly the time for us to, as a Dáil, to catch up with the public on this, who've been very, very strong and who came out in their thousands and thousands during the grassroots campaigns on repeal and on marriage equality and in other campaigns to very clearly say that they no longer view it as any way acceptable that the state or the Republic would function in that manner. And this isn't just about the National Maternity Hospital, Cathaoirleach. This is about how all our healthcare services, which are publicly funded, are delivered. It's about how our schools, which are in receipt of public funds but are privately owned and controlled by private entities, it's about how that is run. And this is fundamentally about what kind of a republic do we want to live in, and what kind of society do we want to live in. And Cathaoirleach, to conclude, the time to keep spending public money on providing healthcare, education and other public services while maintaining private ownership and control must end, and it must end now. Gurb Magat.
Thank you, Deputy.
Minister, this is not just about
a new national maternity hospital. This is a moment in history, and you've got to decide what side of history you're going to be on in relation to this. Are we going to build a healthcare system that is a public healthcare system where we're paying for it anyway? It's a moment in history where we actually redefine a republic. You have to decide that there's a red line here, and it's not about language that you would prefer if the land was owned. It is essential that the land is owned. What is happening is that we are being asked to gift this hospital. So that is what's being asked. A gun is being put to the head. And why is this happening? It's happening because in 2013, this was decided there would be a national maternity hospital co-located. And there has been procrastination. We've had Minister Riley announcing it. We've had Minister Varadkar as Minister for Health. We've had Minister Harris, who told us that he would get this sorted within a month back in 2017. And procrastination now means that we're being told, oh, we can't we can't go the CPAO route if they don't agree to this because it'll delay it. The delays have happened because of procrastination. We're spending 800 million on a new national maternity hospital, a public asset. On what planet would we hand that over to a private entity? We're listening very carefully to the language that's being used, and we know how to decode the language. We know you're saying you would prefer if the land was owned. It isn't a question of preference. It is a question of this being essential. I've got to say, I looked at what the hospital said, the hospital group, the St Vincent's Hospital Group said, for the delivery of integrated patient care on the Ellen Park campus, St Vincent's Hospital Group must retain the ownership of the site. Like, what do they think we are? Absolute total idiots. That they can't provide healthcare unless they own the ground. Like, there's something more going on here, and we know there's something more going on here. It is, you know, it's an issue of is it an issue of ethos? Is it an issue of control? Is it an issue of money? We cannot allow this to happen. And Minister, I don't think you appreciate just how strongly the public feel about this. This is not just about our daughters and our granddaughters. It is about their granddaughters. This is for our future care needs. And you have to decide. What side you're on this. Now, you're telling us the government are not going to oppose our motion. But are they going to actively support it? Are they going to do what the motion is calling for and make sure that this is publicly owned and governed by the state rather than by a private entity? Is that what is going to happen? Will you give us a categoric assurance that that is what you're aiming to achieve, rather than preferring the land to be owned? After everything that has happened in this state that has been outlined already, the idea that we would allow ourselves to be held hostage in the way that we are being held hostage with that kind of terminology is just not acceptable. Minister, I want to hear from you today an assurance that this is the red line, that this will be publicly owned, the land will be publicly owned, and we will not be gifting this new national maternity hospital to a private entity. You have to be on the right side of history. This government has to be on the right side of history in relation to this hospital.
Thank you very much, Deputy. I now move to the Sinn Féin Alliance. Deputy Cullinan, you're sharing 20 minutes with Deputies Cronin, O'Lear, Wynne and O'Reilly.
Thank you. I have 8 minutes myself. Look, First of all, can I commend the Social Democrats for tabling this motion and for giving us the opportunity to discuss this issue. Minister, I have discussed this issue in private with you a number of weeks ago and raised it with you a number of times in the Dáil and in the Health Committee. And you had, over the last number of months, given us, as you thought, some assurances in relation to the involvement of any religious ethos in the management and the running of the new National Maternity Hospital. But it has to be said that those assurances were not strong enough, and you accepted, equally when you were in opposition, that there are real difficulties and challenges here in relation to the ownership of the site and in relation to the governance structures which are being proposed. The Taoiseach, in responding to questions from Deputy Breed Smith and myself last week in the Dáil, agreed that there are fundamental issues of concern here. In fact, he went as far as saying that he agrees with us more than we would have thought. And some would argue it's a bit late in the day for the Taoiseach to now finally come to the conclusion that there are fundamental issues here in relation to the ownership of the land and governance issues. This is a mess entirely of Fine Gael's making. It goes back to when Minister James Riley was Minister for Health. It goes back to when Leo Varadkar was Minister for Health, and it goes back to when Simon Harris was Minister for Health. In fact, the statement yesterday from the St Vincent's Healthcare Group was also very telling in that regard, because it made it very clear from their perspective that they clearly understood that they had an understanding from the department, and I would argue then from government, that the lease arrangements and the governance arrangements and the ownership arrangements that are being put in place were actually signed off on by the state and by the department in principle, and then what had to be worked out is a bit more detail. That's a far cry from what the Taoiseach said in the Dáil last week. So, as usual, Fine Gael have come to this too little too late. But, Minister, you're now the Minister, and it falls to you. And I would agree with the previous speakers that this is a test of the state's ability to make sure that we do the right thing here. If we're going to build a new National Maternity Hospital, which we all want to see built as quickly as possible without delay, it's already about 6 years behind schedule. It's already subject to additional costs. Initially it was to be 300 million, then 500 million, potentially now 800 million, some say €1 billion. We don't know what the full cost will be when you look at the capital cost and the fit-out cost, but it is going to be very substantial. And it is a really important hospital that we all want to see built. But we also have to get the foundations right, quite literally, in terms of the governance foundations and the ownership foundations. It was very disappointing, I have to say, to read the statement from the St Vincent's Healthcare Group yesterday. And while there is now a tug-of-war going on between that organisation and the government, the problem is, again, women are left in the middle. The future of maternity services are left in the middle. And they talk about integrated hospital and patient care. They offer that up as a reason why the land cannot either be gifted to the state or sold to the state. They want to ensure integrated hospital patient care. I think they're talking about integrated care within the St Vincent's Healthcare Group. What we are talking about is integrated care within all of our maternity hospitals that need to be publicly owned, publicly managed, publicly governed. That's the integrated hospital care that I'm concerned about, and I would hope all of the deputies in this House are concerned about. So the question then is, what happens now, Minister? That's the fundamental question, because I very much hope that we're not going to be again sold a pup here and told that, well, we're going to extend the lease from 99 years, maybe to 149 years. We look at tinkering around with some of the legal arrangements and contractual arrangements, but essentially we'll proceed with this convoluted process that has been put in place that simply isn't good enough. And it just beggars belief that the state would build a new hospital, a state-of-the-art hospital, pay for the building, pay for the fit-out, pay for the staff, pay for the management and running of the hospital, and yet some private charity would own the land, and a board of governors put in place where you don't appoint all of the people on that board, and when it cannot be argued that the board would be fully governed by the state on behalf of the public. None of that, Minister, makes sense at all. I have to raise with you as well, while we talk about the ownership of the new National Maternity Hospital, there are other maternity hospitals that are chronically underfunded. You know the situation in the Rotunda Hospital. I've raised this with you before. There was a KPMG report which identified clinical risks, very real clinical risks in the neonatal emergency department, in the inpatient and outpatient departments and other areas. They cannot wait for the co-location option with Conley before they get a resolution to their problems. I know there are capacity issues in St Luke's in Kilkenny. I would argue the same in University Hospital Waterford. Across all of our maternity hospitals, there are real problems in relation to capacity. There is, of course, a need to continue to invest in the National Maternity Strategy, and that needs continued investment. And I welcomed last year additional funding that was made available. We have to continue with that. But we also have to increase capital funding into those maternity hospitals to ensure that we're providing the services to the highest standard across all of those maternity hospitals. For far too long, women's healthcare has been left behind by successive governments. We all know the track record, Minister, going back to cervical check, symphysiotomy, even going back as far as the mother and baby homes. We can all chart the history of the relationship between women and healthcare and this state, and it isn't a very rosy one. And we all want to put that behind us, and we all want to move to a healthcare system that is truly secular, one that delivers for women, one where there is absolutely no ambiguity whatsoever about the type of healthcare that can be provided in any of these hospitals. And notwithstanding any legal guarantees, any legal assurances that you may offer this House, and you said this yourself on national radio, despite all of those assurances, when there is a doubt, and where ambiguity does exist, and when you have a convoluted process that involves a board and a company set up that is not owned and managed by the state, there is a problem. And the final point I will make is this, and my point is directly to the St Vincent's Healthcare Group, because the state has a responsibility, you as a Minister for State has a responsibility, but the Religious Sisters of Charity are telling us that they are essentially gifting the land to the state. Well, if they're genuine about that, why not go the full distance and simply gift the land to the state, as opposed to gifting it to some private charity? What's the reason for this? I don't buy this argument of the need for integrated patient care. That's the reason why the St Vincent's Healthcare Group won't gift the land to the state. That doesn't make any sense, but it only makes sense if you want to have some level of control. Then it does make sense, and for that reason it arouses suspicion, which is genuine, which is real, which is profound, and which you have to respond to. So, Minister, we need a resolution to this, and in my view, the resolution can only be public land, public hospital, public ownership, and a hospital governed by the state for the people and for the women of this state. Gurmag.
Deputy Cronin, please.
I welcome the opportunity to support this Social Democrats PMB. It would be a great start for our children to be born in a national maternity hospital owned and run for the state, by the rules of the state, without any sleight of corporate hand or torture of language and logic as to ownership and ethos. The group statement last night for the delivery of integrated patient care on the Elm Park campus. St Vincent's Healthcare Group must retain ownership of the site. It's mysterious, Minister, and we've had too much mystery. Decades of sorrowful mysteries in the treatment of our women and girls in their reproductive lives and health. Quite simply, the nuns must gift it or sell it straight to the state, straight to us, the people, who will be using it, funding it, running it, and without any corporate or incorporated detours by holding companies. We have a rotten history in how we treat our women and girls in pregnancy and childcare in this state, most of it caused by professional and institutional devotion to the Catholic Church, where the men made the rules, even those that didn't wear the trousers, and while other men in suits and white coats and stethoscopes around their necks did their bidding, oversaw barbaric practices such as symphysiotomy. In enduring our physical capacity to reproduce, women were reduced to breeding beasts. For those damaged by those shameful practices, there was a veterinarian quality to their treatment, although the vets I know would have been a lot more compassionate. And in speaking about how we treated women in the past, I want to speak up for women in the present as well, in particular the women who have written to me, some at 40 weeks and counting, telling me that in labour they were facing an invasive and an unnecessary internal examination, not for a clinical reason, but to confirm established labour so they could admit their partners for the delivery of their child. Again, the bovine treatment of this is unmistakable. Women who were put upon to fit the system as opposed to the system fitting around the needs of Irish women when they are at the limits of their coping and at their most vulnerable. Chosen birth partners are not visitors, and they are not an accessory to the process of pregnancy. You said, Ara, that we need a revolution in women's healthcare. Absolutely, you won't be alone at the barricades there. Frankly, it's farcical that in 2021 we are tiptoeing around ownership of our National Maternity Hospital with a religious order. The gift should be not to a company, but to the state, who will pay for and run the hospital for the public good for women of every faith and none, and also for the good of our children. From the moment we give birth to our children, the Church and the State must separate. You must be out of your minds allowing a private holding company have an input into women's healthcare and all that that entails. The hospital must be owned and run by the State.
Thank you, Deputy O'Leary.
Minister, as a state, we have unfortunately made, I suppose to say virtue is the wrong thing, but there's certainly a strong tradition of devolving essential public services and the state abdicating responsibility for them. That didn't start with you, Minister. We have a very long history of that. We see it in education, we see it in all sorts of areas, we see it very strongly in healthcare. And if we are going to take a step away from that, as we should, and indeed the state should be intervening in places that they aren't directly involved in, such as childcare, then this is an essential part of it, Minister. It is right, it is proper, it is the objective that should be there is a publicly funded, publicly run healthcare system, and a national maternity hospital should be at the heart of that. And Minister, the dangers here are obvious, and I note the commitments that were given by the hospital group yesterday, and I welcome them. But put this forward 10 years, put this forward 15 years, and there's a controversy that arises because a woman is denied a termination, or a woman is denied a tubal ligation, or there's some change in legislation, and St Vincent's Hospital Group refused to go along with it because of whether some change from within the internal politics of that group, or for whatever reason. And those commitments given 10, 15 years prior no longer stand. The government of the day will be standing there going, well, there's not much we can do about that. I'm afraid we don't own that site. We cannot intervene there. Or we have contacted the hospital group, we've contacted them to try and see if this can be resolved. But the strength of the hand of the government would have been severely weakened by decisions that are being taken here and now. Minister, it is right, it is proper that at the heart of our public healthcare system is a national maternity hospital, well funded, that is properly run, publicly owned. Minister, while I have the opportunity as well, during a dús stocha just ar an ábhar sin tá sé fíorthachtaach go mbeadh an ospidéal seo I seileamh an pobal agus go mbeadh sé ag rith ar an banús sin ba chóir nach mbeadh éon agla faoi éon buail sa tóchaí faoi na polasa a bheith in san ospidéal. Minister, I take the opportunity very briefly as well, if I may. I listened with interest to your interviews during the last few days in relation to the restrictions in maternity hospitals, and it appears to me that you are now listening, and I welcome that. I welcome in particular the emphasis that you put on the full duration of labour. As Deputy Cronin just made the point, the arbitrary decision about how dilated a woman is should not dictate when a woman gets care, but it should only be a start, Minister, and you and Paul Reid need to be on top of the hospital to make sure they're implementing that, but we also get to all of the key appointments, particularly, but not exclusively, for women who are at high risk or who have experience of pregnancy loss. And as well as that, Minister, after birth is a crucial time for partner support, and we shouldn't be talking about this in terms of slots for visitors. Of course, there needs to be policies in relation to all that. but partners are essential support. They are not visitors, and that applies to all those appointments and after birth as well. So this is needs to be just a start, Minister, but you need to stay on top of this, and certainly I'd be keeping an eye on it. But I welcome the fact that you're listening, and particularly around that point around the difference between established labour. There's just labour, and that message needs to go out loud and clear.
Deputy Wynne.
So the maternity sector in this country has been critically and consistently understaffed for many years. We have one of the lowest levels of consultant obstetricians and gynecologists in the OECD, and this is shameful. Maternity services have been pockmarked by multiple investigations and inquiries into the care standards and practices, and sadly the development of a new and improved national maternity hospital has been in the pipeline since the 90s, and since 2013 has been in each programme for government, which in and of itself is telling of how much of a priority maternity services are to this and previous governments. In 2017, my party moved a motion that received unanimous support to ensure that the new National Maternity Hospital remains entirely within public ownership, and rightly so. Despite support from every side of the chambers, its provisions were never implemented, and here we are today. So the public rightly want clarification for government who in effect will run this hospital. The motion notes that nearly 4 years after the Religious Sisters charity committed to departing St Vincent's Health Group, they remain the sole shareholders. Why is the ownership for the capital lands being transferred to a proxy church charity rather than being handed over directly to the state? What has been going on within the engagements, Minister? This morning, Minister Stephen Donnelly spoke on the radio and essentially tried to deny the relationship between who owns the land and governments of the hospital. That is not good enough. The Mulvey Agreement that emerged as resolution in 2016 is not fit for purpose. The state must own the land. A 100-year lease is not good enough. Follow through and action taken to ensure respect and independence from religious influence for our mothers and babies are needed now.
Thank you, Deputy Wynne, and now Deputy O'Reilly.
It's 4 years since Sinn Féin unanimously got support for our motion on the ownership of the National Maternity Hospital, and I spoke on that debate and I said, and it remains true today, for an order that takes a vow of poverty, chastity, obedience and service to the poor, the Sisters of Charity appear to have a fixation with land and property that would make a property speculator or indeed a vulture fund blush. I don't know why we keep having to have these conversations, but I tell you one thing, Minister, you will have the unanimous, I hope, support of this House in your dealings with the religious orders. But you have a very important job to do, and there are two things that really concern me. The first is when I was thinking about this motion and when I was coming up to the chamber here, I'm reminded of that photograph of the majority of elected Fianna Fáil TDs and senators with the vote no posters, making their position in terms of women's rights and our right to reproductive health care very, very clear. That worries me, because I worry that you won't get support at the Cabinet table. I know that some of those people now sit at Cabinet. That concerns me, but you will have the support of Sinn Féin, and you will have the support, I hope, of the majority of people in this House. And the second person I thought about when I was coming in here this evening was Sheila Hodgers. Sheila died in 1983. She was a friend of my parents, and I knew her. She died in 1983, and her baby died as well. And we could argue all day over what it was that caused her death and the clinical reasons, etc., etc. But I believe that Sheila's life could have been saved were it not for the religious convictions and persuasions of the people involved in delivering her care. So when we reflect on what is needed, we need to remember people like Sheila. So this is not a zero-sum game. This is important. The access to healthcare for women is important. Free of religious influence has to be absolutely paramount. The nuns and priests have no business in our hospital. Why they want to own this land, or they profess to say they need to own this land, baffles me. Because there is no good reason for it.
What we need to do, and we pledge our support to you, Minister, is ensure that this hospital is built on public land and is entirely free from any religious influence whatsoever. We will support you in that, Minister. It is important work and it needs to be done.
Thank you, Deputy O'Reilly. I now call Deputy Alan Kelly on behalf of the Labour Party. You have 8 minutes, Deputy.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank my colleagues in the Social Democrats for bringing this forward. Minister, you've been handed a hospital pass, pardon the pun, and it's been handed down to you by bad advice from officials, by your predecessors, but you're going to actually have to, in some way, manage to take that pass and turn it around for the people of Ireland, because you have no other option. This from St. Vincent's Healthcare Group letter yesterday was 2 fingers to you. I stood here, spoke to the Taoiseach yesterday right there. I asked him straight up what was happening here, and he said that you were going to be negotiating and talking with the hospital group as regards ensuring that it would be gifted to the state, hopefully. That's what I took from it, to be fair. I believe what he was saying was accurate. I think that was your intention. And from your nodding, I accept it. I genuinely feel you've been left in a situation now where you have very little options. Because they then, after the contributions here yesterday, after the coverage in the media, decided to issue this statement, which is 2 fingers to you and to the Irish people. It's basically saying you're not entitled to do those negotiations, and we won't actually negotiate in good faith. And the critical line is point 5, for the avoidance of doubt, for the delivery of integrated patient care on the Elm Park campuses, St. Vincent's Hospital Group must retain ownership of the site. And the most important question to be asked in the chamber today is this: why? I can guarantee you that's your question too, in fairness to you. Why? Is it for the National Maternity Services of Ireland as part of the greater National Maternity Strategy, which I'm a huge supporter of? Or is it because they just don't want to relinquish control? It's the latter. And the documents that were released, colleagues, which in fairness they had to release because my colleague Ivana Bacek, who's fought on this for years, had FOI'd them. It demonstrates that. But it also demonstrates huge failures, nothing to do with you, huge failures in the Department of Health, and the officials and the way in which this is dealt with. Huge failures. Completely missed the thinking of the Irish people and what the Irish people would tolerate. Completely. 4 years ago at our national conference, when this broke, I stood up and got an emergency motion passed. We've been fighting on this for years, taking the advice of the likes of Peter Boylan, Jerry Burke, and many others. There has been a historic failure here. When you go into it and you look at what the Sisters of Charity said they were going to give to the state, and you see then under the transfer of holdings, when they got the permission of the Holy See, it got its letter of grant, as it's called. It stated, though, the provisions relating to the validity and lawlessness of alienations found in Canons 638, 639 and Canons 192, 194 and the Code of Canon Law and Proper Law are to be observed. Canon 1293 requires the congregation to have a just cause, such as urgent necessity, evident advantage, piety, charity, or some other grave pastoral reason to make the transfer. That is the foundation of what we're talking about here. No hospital group which has got a delineation like that, with those conditions attached, can be in charge of the National Maternity Hospital. Full stop. If the foundations, Minister, are wrong, then the hospital can't be built. And your heart and soul, I know you know that. So, we're now scrambling. I also like to know why St Vincent's Hospitals Group, who are willing to give a 149-year lease, are not willing to gift the site. Why is it such a big difference? It's another critical question. And it is because of what I've just read out in relation to canon law. This is a crossroads for our country in relation to the influence of particularly the Catholic Church over hospitals, over healthcare, over education, over everything. And you have to make the right decision. And I actually believe you want to make the right decision, Minister, and we will support you in making the right decision. The programme for government, though, is weak, deadly weak on this. It actually doesn't commit to it being a hospital that will be in public ownership. It says it will conclude the governance arrangements and commence the building of the new maternity hospital at St Vincent's Hospital, Dublin. It doesn't say it will be fully owned by the Irish people. Its governance will be dictated by the state and that the land will be owned by the state. No, it doesn't. So your PFG commitments, you're going to have to go further than them. So, Minister, option A as regards what was going to happen here, option B and option C have all failed. We're now down to option D. And you need to have backbone here. You need to have leverage. We don't have any options. Our options are either to CPO the site or, and I say we because it's all of us, CPO the site or else look at James's or Connolly. This has to be co-located for best clinical needs. But why should we move? Why should, after all of the work that's gone into it, why should we move? So, my suggestion to you is, if they are not willing to gift it, CPO it. But why just talk about CPOing this piece of the land? We all know post-COVID that we need to invest in our national hospitals. Why not CPO the whole site, the whole thing? I'm sure that will make St Vincent's Hospital Group think about what they're saying to you and saying to the Irish people and the two fingers they gave to everyone last night. Why don't we CPO the whole lot and turn it into one national campus? A campus for everyone, a campus that will be fully owned by the state. The public part, the private part, the maternity, everything. I'm sure that'll give you leverage. I'm sure watching this now, that'll make them think. We need to build up leverage here because this is completely unacceptable. What was done by the Department of Health here was so weak, was so wrong. You're now left to pick up the ball, Minister. Please, on behalf of the Irish people, make the decision. CPO either the site or, in my view, I think the best option here is to go and CPO the whole thing. I've always believed in this, as you know. I'm not being different in my approach. I've been saying it for years.
Thank you, Deputy.
In this scenario, given what's happened in the last 24 hours, it's confirmed my view that that is the best solution to this situation.
Thank you, Deputy Kelly. I now call on behalf of People Before Profit, Deputies Smith, Kenny and Barry. You have 8 minutes, Deputies.
I'm sharing time with Deputy McBarry. I want to thank the Social Democrats for the motion today. It's really important that we discuss this out, and no doubt it will emerge. Lots of more facts and figures and realities will emerge over the next period of time. After all, it's only a week ago, or less than a week ago, when, to the alarm of everybody, we discovered that the government shared the concerns of the opposition on this issue, and a lot has emerged since then. But I just want to say to the people of Ireland, anyone who shares the concerns of the majority of this House now should see their role as really pushing on this issue over the next period and joining us in protest outside Leinster House this Saturday at 1. I'm aware it's also Pride Day, and I'd like to take the opportunity to wish everybody a very positive and happy Pride Day. But it's at 1 o'clock at Leinster House, and plenty of time to party with your gay community, in your gay community afterwards. And as I say, a week is a long time in politics, and we know a lot more now than we did a week ago. When you find yourself on the same page as senior ministers in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, it feels a bit uncomfortable, to say the least, from my point of view. But nevertheless, I do think that we are living in extraordinary times when we see what's going on here. So let's say we take the sisters at their word, just to be a devil's advocate here. And when they say that they're withdrawing from healthcare and they don't want to have any involvement in the ethos, then let's look at the detail. 1 week ago, we were told by the St Vincent's Healthcare Group that this land was being gifted to the people of Ireland. Then, with a closer look at the detail, you find it's not being gifted to the people of Ireland, but being gifted to a private charity. And nobody is denying that now, including the group themselves. 1 week ago, we had a 99-year lease. We now have a 149-year lease without any religious ethos or influence involved. However, a search of the Charities Register today shows us that the St Vincent's Health Holding Group still holds the charitable purposes of Mother Mary Aikenhead. So how can you reconcile these two opposing positions? I believe that yesterday's statement from the St Vincent's Holding Group was deeply flawed and disingenuous, and insulting not just to the women of Ireland, but indeed, after the likely outcome of this debate today, when a vast majority will agree to the motion, the insistence on the board on maintaining ownership of the land is deeply insulting to the democratic will of the people of this country. The St Vincent's Health Group say they must retain ownership of the land for clinical, governance and operational reasons. But why? This makes no sense at all. When required, patients are routinely transferred from one hospital to the other all over this country and have been so for decades. This is not rocket science. And they refer in their statement to the golden share of the Minister for Health. Well, why should we have to rely on extensive legal and complex legal agreements and commercial terms over an asset that the state is fully paying for with taxpayers' money, the taxpayers being the workers and the investors of this country? Why should there be any ambiguity and why should the state invest in an asset of a private company? And the only answer to that can be that the state is not fully committed to shifting away from the privatisation of healthcare, from removing healthcare from the hands of religious orders, and in particular in this case, reproductive and maternity health. It is not good enough, and it is not about the integrated needs of women and babies and the reproductive needs of that cohort that is driving this. I believe this is about the integrated investment interests of the St Vincent's Holding Group and the healthcare and indeed the Sisters of Charity. Fintan O'Toole tweeted today a look at a chart that was published by the St Vincent's Holding Group on the 14th of May, very, very recently, that shows the hierarchy of private control of the healthcare system. And ultimately, that shows you that the St Vincent's Holding Group will have the power to sell, to mortgage, to do their bidding as a commercial entity with this hospital. So it's a big business interest versus the interests of our health services. Public services, particularly health and education, have to be grasped out of the hold of the church. And the slogan, separate church and state, I believe will gather momentum. And I just repeat that it's really important that the people of Ireland get behind this, because after all, change in this country, and we've shown it time and time again, with the same-sex marriage, we've shown it again with the repeal agenda, we've shown it with the water charges. What changes the course of history is not what happens in this House on its own, it's what happens on the streets, in our communities, in our workplaces. It is people power combined with the democratic will of this House that will bring forward the changes, and we should not put up for another minute any more of this nonsense that the St Vincent's Holding Group can determine the future of women's health in this country.
Deputy Barry.
Minister, it's time to take the gloves off with the Sisters of Charity. Let's remind ourselves who we're dealing with here. Sisters of Charity were heavily involved in the illegal adoptions racket. The St Patrick's Guild, an agency that they ran, handed over files to TUSLA in 2016, and it was then discovered that the Guild had been involved in 126 illegal adoptions. However, this is unlikely to have been the entire story. Experts reckon that there may have been as many as 10,000 illegal adoptions in this state. How many of these were the Sisters of Charity involved in? It's unknown, but I don't think anybody believes that it was limited to 126. St Vincent's moved to Elm Park in 1970. Did funds from the illegal adoption racket help to fund the arrangements at Elm Park? The Sisters of Charity owe the state money, owe redress money, €5 million, a paltry amount, given the crimes that the orders are linked to from the past. I stand to be corrected, but the latest information that I was able to obtain indicates that less than half of this, a mere €2 million, has been paid, and that no payment has been made for the last 8 years. So, Minister, you are going to be mandated by this House to tell the sisters that the hospital is going to be state-owned, that it's going to be state-controlled, and that it's going to be built on state land. While you are at it, feel free to tell the sisters that there are deputies in this House who would like to go much further than that, who favour the confiscation of the sisters' wealth, with compensation to be paid only on the basis of proven need, who stand for the separation of the church from the state, who will participate in the protest demonstration this Saturday, and who will argue for ongoing and much larger protests if the issues at stake now are not resolved satisfactorily and are not resolved quickly.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call the regional group. Deputy Lowry, I believe you're sharing with Deputy Tobin, and it's 8 minutes.
Minister, one thing is certain: Ireland needs a national maternity hospital. That seems to be the only aspect of the current plan that is not shrouded in uncertainty. Plans to provide a modern maternity hospital at Elm Park date back to 2013. At that time, the project had an estimated cost of £150 million. The following years were dominated by disputes over governance of the new hospital. This included a frustratingly long period during which legalities moved at a snail's pace as the Sisters of Charity waited for permission from the Holy See on transferring their shareholding to the newly formed St Vincent's Group. We now know that despite the best efforts of government to purchase the site, St Vincent's Group is insisting on retaining ownership of the site. The Mulvey arrangement was put on the table as the solution back in 2017. I asked the question, why did it take so long for the penny to drop in government circles that this formula was unacceptable to government? So here we are, 8 years later, still in stalemate. Despite efforts by the Taoiseach to remain focused on the fundamental issue of ownership of the site, the public and media debate has now switched focus to what range of services will be provided at the new maternity hospital. I fully understand the correlation and the concerns about future services, but until we have finality on the site, we do not have a hospital to provide services of any kind. Other matters of importance must not overshadow this fact. Until this matter is successfully concluded and concerns on safeguarding public investment are addressed, the new National Maternity Hospital will remain as it has been for years, an architect's drawing. Like the National Children's Hospital, no one is disputing the absolute need for the National Maternity Hospital. These purpose-built, modern and vital facilities are needed. The mothers of Ireland deserve modern accommodation, high-tech equipment and top-class support services. Despite the clear need, they cannot be provided at any cost, financial or otherwise. They cannot start out at one figure and then double, triple and quadruple as time goes on. They cannot be built on sites that may result in legal wrangles for future generations. Based on the lessons we have learned and continue to learn from the Children's Hospital, we must ensure that our successors are not standing here again years to come, grappling with issues arising from a national state-owned hospital standing on charity-owned grounds. This is the primary issue that needs to be set out in stone before we concentrate on the provision of services that we have already been assured will be provided at the state-owned hospital. As I say, When I say that, I mean that the horse must remain in front of the cart if we are to progress this project. Issues such as those that arose with the National Children's Hospital and those that have emerged in relation to the National Maternity Hospital beg the question as to why we struggle in this country when it comes to delivery of major projects. Why are they permitted to drag on open-endedly, causing frustrating delays and alarming cost overruns without serious repercussions? After years of procrastination and prevarication, after years of dancing around the ownership issue, we are now back to the crossroads. We are now told that the cost of the project has shot up to 800 million. It really is a mess, an embarrassing saga that reflects poorly on the competence of our national administrators. Why are we so inept at delivering state-funded facilities? Our abject failure to address the alarming issues of responsibility and accountability is a damning indictment of our procurement structures and procedures.
Deputy Larry, Deputy Tobin,
yesterday in the courts, liability was admitted by the defendants in a case taken by a couple whose healthy unborn baby was aborted in the National Maternity Hospital after they were wrongly told that their son had Edwards syndrome in March 2019. Every party that has spoken here today on the National Maternity Hospital has been completely silent in this case. Over the last 2 years, I've heard of no other political party who have raised this case in the Dáil. These parties need to ask themselves, why have they remained silent? Christopher's parents were incredibly courageous in fighting against all of the odds for justice for their son, Christopher. They have, I believe, been treated shockingly by senior staff in the National Maternity Hospital and 2 ministers for health. Indeed, for 2 years, the parents did their utmost to simply identify this threat to public health and to ensure that the necessary changes were made to make sure that this would never happen again. I've raised this in the Dáil over and over again with these Taoiseach and with these ministers, and none of them delivered on the simple request to have an investigation happen with regards what happened to Christopher. They have not carried out the necessary changes to ensure that more couples do not find themselves in this situation either. And I am now calling on the Minister to hold a full public investigation into what happened. And it's astounding as well that the couple were referred to a test from the National Maternity Hospital to the Murrian Fetal Health Clinic, a private clinic run by the obstetricians themselves. Stranger still, and this is an incredible situation, that the state announced at the time that they would cover the legal costs, not just for the public hospital, but for the private hospital too. An unprecedented move. I believe that it's imperative that the new National Maternity Hospital in St. Vincent's is a fully public hospital. Not just that we have separation from church and state, but we have separation from the state and private facilities operating on these grounds. I also want to raise a point around the language that's happened here in the amendment, and it may not be purposeful, but it's happened nonetheless. The SOCDEM amendment states that a Catholic ethos is a threat to the health of women. This is a gross insult to millions of practicing Catholics in Ireland. And some of this language, not necessarily the language from the Social Democrats, but others and on the media, I believe has been bordering on significantly intolerant and sectarian. I would ask members of this House to moderate their language. Last week, teachers came before the Oireachtas Committee and said that practicing Catholics in schools are being singled out for bullying at the moment. And I can tell you that many people around the country who are Catholics at the moment feel that Ireland is becoming a cold place for them. We are celebrating as a state that we have taken a whole sector of society out of the closet. We should not seek with our language to put another sector of society into the closet in this particular debate. The Irish Republic should be a pluralist republic. It should be one where everybody, no matter what their colour, creed or orientation is, should be able to be who they are to the full extent without fear of favour. I also want to just say at the end, and my colleague Matt Shanahan asked me to raise this, is that it is absolutely incredible that there is an ongoing situation where partners of mothers are unable to make it to attend those appointments or to the birth of children still in certain hospitals in the state, and that this debate has been going on and on for months without the government getting its together is absolutely wrong, and let this go no further. Gurb Mahagat.
Thank you, Deputy. I now, on behalf of the Rural Independence Group, call Deputy McGrath.
I don't know if any of my colleagues.
I believe you're sharing, but
If they come, you might remind me, please. The National Maternity Hospital project was first announced in 2013. That is now 8 years ago. Like the National Children's Hospital, the real scandal with the development is the skyrocketing costs. 2018, the original cost was in the region of 150 million. 2017-18, the costs had risen by over 100% to an estimated 350 million. 221, last Friday in fact, we're told by the Minister for Health that the building infrastructure cost has been priced at 500 million. Further commissioning costs, including fit-out and transferring an entire hospital to a new site, will be a further 350 million. That is 800 million, 4 times the original estimate. Given the utter lack of competence by the government to manage major projects, and the officials in Ireland as well, we have to look at the Children's Hospital. We have to look at this. Look at broadband. Look at everything else. The ineptitude is frightening. We're going to have to get some foreign authorities in here, outside people that will oversee this and bring this to book. It's disgustingly just madness. Any business wouldn't survive a week if they're behaving like that. As I said, this is the real issue surrounding the National Maternity Hospital, I believe. Taxpayers will once again be left to carry the can. Always. But taxpayers are sorry and tired of this. How 8 years on, a building work at the site of St Vincent's campus in South Dublin is still at preliminary stage. And you can blame the sisters all you like. There's nothing got to do with them. Meanwhile, each year, more than 8,000 women continue to give birth in wholly ill-suited, crowded conditions in the Victorian-era building at Holles Street. Government politicians rehearse the same arguments that have failed delivery of the project from the beginning. Very same mantra. Under a plan that is once a statement about the state's ambitions for the modern healthcare and for messy compromise rooted in the century of official neglect in the same area, the government will build an 800 million hospital on, as I said, this site, if they ever get to build it. And this is where the problem is. So I am very concerned, that this is, on Tuesday, 22nd of June, the St Vincent Hospital Group, yesterday, has said that it must retain ownership of the site that the new National Maternity Hospital will be built on. This means that the hospital group is happy to proceed with the arrangements with the religious sisters of charity. As I heard you last Sunday, I think, already saying you were going to meet him. I heard you this morning on online saying going to meet him. When are you going to meet him? Why not sit down and talk to him? Rather than bashing him up and down the country and bashing him everywhere. Why not meet them? Sit down and respect them for what they are and what they've done for this country as well. Clearly, this announcement from the hospital can be viewed as a direct message to the government parties to stop playing politics with issues. That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. In a statement, the group said that it is more than willing to meet the government to discuss the relocation of the hospital from Holles Street. However, it added that for delivery of integrated patient care and in Park campus, St Vincent Health Group must retain ownership of the site. And that's their position. So why not meet them and talk to them? As I said, I believe that this whole saga is more now to do this week with a by-election in Dublin Bay South. And that's a sad state of affairs, that we can kick the sisters up and down the streets and all over the country and bash them. And Deputy Tobin is right. There's an apartheid here. There's bigotry here. There's hate speech here, which we're jumping up and down every day of the week talking about it. There were horrible things done by some members of different orders and by priests. And are we going to say bashing all the rest of the good ones forever? The good people that have given so much service to educate our people and ran the hospitals. And when the matrons were running the hospitals, they were clean, there was no MRSA, and they were run properly. Not the shambles of a health service that we have now. So I think it's appalling the way the language has been used here, and the way the sisters have been harangued and bullied and sullied, and you won't sit down and meet them. But no, you're at it to try and garner votes in the by-election. You delay and procrastinate, and delay and delay and delay. And the good sisters up and down the country that educated the most of us and brothers are being tarnished and destroyed, their good name. The bad ones have no talk on anyone. They should be rooted out and dealt with, and anyone who suffered abuse and met someone outside today should be compensated and helped. But this bashing of the religious orders in this house, it makes me sick to my core. It's a Christian country, but the Christian attitudes here to our religious is shockingly disgusting. And the Taoiseach and everybody else are tarnished her. Engaged in it. He started off this because of the Dublin by-election. We know that they had a big vote there for the repeal, I think 70% or something, and this is the electorate they're playing to. And it's so sad that they dumped the sisters under the bus, but worse than that, they allow women have babies give birth in hospitals that's totally unfit. Why don't you go and buy a site elsewhere?
and leave the sisters alone. Buy a site of CPO or whatever and move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy McGrath. That's fine. Just wanted to bring your attention. Deputy Healy-Rae is present. Thank you. Deputy Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. I wish to speak to the matter at hand, the National Maternity Hospital, and the fact that this project was first announced in 2013, almost 8 years ago. And like the National Children's Hospital, the real scandal with this development is the skyrocketing costs. In 2013, the original cost was in the region of 150 million. The cost had risen by...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, if I will, I'll take off that one and I'll put on my own. But I do want to support the fishermen who are here today from our coastal communities also.
Do so, as you're well aware, but not with a hat.
Thank you. I appreciate. I am sorry. I neglected it. I was rushing, as you know. The costs have risen by over 100% to an estimated 350 million. That was by 2018. In 2021, last Friday, we were told by the Minister for Health, Minister Donnelly, that the building infrastructure cost had been priced at 500 million. Further commissioning costs, including fit-out and transferring an entire hospital to a new site, will be a further 300 million. That is 800 million, over 4 times the original cost, or an over 400% increase. Now, there seems to be another lack of competence by the government to manage major capital projects. How can we be assured, and I would ask the Minister this question, that considering the runaway train that has been the budget for this project, how can we be assured that it will even stop at this money and that it won't continue to escalate and to escalate? And do we really think that the taxpayers can be treated in this way? Because remember, when we talk about the state and when we talk about the state's money, there is no such thing. It is the people's money. It is the people's taxes that keep this country and the wheels rolling underneath it. And I feel outraged on their behalf. This is a real issue surrounding the National Maternity Hospital, as the taxpayers will once again be left to carry the can. Now 8 years on, and the building work on the site at St Vincent's campus in South Dublin is still at a preliminary stage. I really believe that one of the reasons why this is becoming such a hot potato these days is because of the by-election that is going on here at the moment. I think that it is wrong to treat people in this way. The people who need to avail of proper maternity services in a state-of-the-art facility should have so in a timely fashion, but not at a cost that's allowed to run away like a train with no brakes.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy, my list here has changed. I now call the Independent Group, Deputy Collins and Connolly. You're sharing, again, an 8-minute slot. Deputy.
Thank you. I intend on raising this issue with the Taoiseach later, and I'd be looking for a clear, direct answer. If the situation remains as it is, Minister, with the St Vincent's Health Group refusing to sell the site to the state, is the government preparing to CPO the site, and if it's too costly and if it's too lengthy, are they prepared to abandon the Vincent Hospital site and begin the process of looking elsewhere? Women have to draw a red line on this. It can't go on. This would obviously create a new problem, as there's an urgent need for a new, up-to-date national maternity hospital. But the government must make its position clear. The days when religious institutions, or their proxies in this case, can dictate to the state and to the women of this country while enjoying 100% state funding are over. I commend the Social Democrats for tabling this parliamentary motion in a timely fashion. I'm pleased the government are not opposing it, but it will still not solve the problem. The decision to locate a state-built, state-funded, much-needed, modern national maternity hospital without clear clarification as to the ownership of the site, the governance and ethos of the hospital has resulted in a present mess, and mess it most certainly is. The situation can only arise because our public service itself is a mess. What we have is a public health service grafted onto an inherited system from the 19th century based on the ideology of the Poor Laws and the provision of health for the poor as a charitable act provided by the Catholic Church in the main. In 2015, while I was a member of the committee which drew up the Sláintecare report, research showed that in 2015, out of a state health budget of 13 billion, 3.6 billion went to non-statutory agencies, 53% of this went to acute voluntary hospitals and 47% to non-acute agencies. Section 38 and 39s received some 3 billion for at least 3,000 different agencies. The level of outsourcing of essential services to charities and NGOs is simply mind-boggling. They should be directly employed by the HSE. The current impasse on the National Maternity Hospital is a consequence of the fact that the political parties who've dominated the state for the past 100 years, the mandarins in the Department of Health, the leadership of the HSE and particular sections of the medical profession have all been happy to live with the situation, and that leaves aside the role of the Catholic Church in demanding a leading role in the provision of essential public services such as our health and education. I've got about a minute and a half left. I think the situation now in relation to the National Maternity Hospital is a test. Are we to have high-quality, free-to-use public service as a right for all in a modern, secular republic, or will there be a shabby compromise with the state spending at least 800 million to €1 billion to build a hospital on land it does not own, with state funding 100% of the cost of staff and the Board of Governors nominated by private charity, and absolutely no certainty that all the medical procedures legal in the state will be provided to women who need it. Rights are exerted, Minister, charity is bestowed. And I just want to make a point about what's happened in the last week. We had a statement from the Sisters of Charity to say they're going to gift the site to the Irish people. It then transpired quite clearly that the intent was that they're going to gift it to, in actual fact, to a charity that their own holding company. Then we had the Taoiseach, new minister, saying that the land must be in public ownership and that the governance should be in state control. Then we had the Sisters of Charity issue a statement saying that the ownership of the land was not an issue. The government never raised it before. We know in 2017 Minister Harris did. Then we had the statement yesterday from the St Vincent's Healthcare Group saying they must retain ownership of the land for clinical governance. I say that we must, as a state, publicly own this land to retain the ownership of land for clinical governance and operational reasons, including the provision of the sale of safe integrated system of our care. And Minister, I heard you say this morning you're going to meet the nuns privately, Sister Charity. I thought they were out of the equation since 2017.
Deputy Connolly.
Tá sé breis agus seachtó bliain ó fógraí an tír seo ina poblacht. Agus raibh an ógra sin agus faríor tar éis an ógra sin níor cuireadh mór an béime gochan na bán nó ceartan na bán. Agus faríor san 21 déag táid fós ag bra cólach príomháideach agus charanacht chun seirbhísí bunúsach ó híomh máracha agus leanaí a chur fáilún. Níl muid chun ghlacu lei sin. Sin an teachtarach láidir weimse ó na déanlaí sóisialta agus forhar na dála aniu. Níl muid chun ghlacu lei sin níos mó. Minister, we're here 70 years almost after we declared ourselves a republic, and we certainly have a long way to go before we make that actually a reality. But around the same period of time has elapsed since the mother and baby home, already referred to, debacle by the Deputy Cairns. And here we are in the 21st century, and you're telling us that you will rely on assurances from a private company, a charity, that they will provide all of the services that we need and guaranteed by law. I don't want your assurances. What I want is a national maternity hospital on public land, fully owned by the state and operated by the state for the people of Ireland. I want to thank the Social Democrats for bringing this motion and for allowing their private members' time to be used in this manner. This is the second motion within 3 weeks where we put the spotlight on national the maternity services. And you talk about a revolution in maternity care that's needed. That was supposed to have been done with the strategy, the national maternity strategy, that has not been implemented. So if we look just at the topic under discussion today, we can go back in 2013, May, and May jumps out for some reason. May 13, Minister O'Reilly announced co-location. Now that was following a report from an accountancy firm back in 2008, which said co-location was the way forward. Then in May 16, we had mediation through Mulvey, and we had a ridiculous outcome of that, where the government were going to be satisfied with a golden roll, or a golden, not a golden handshake, but a golden chair. Then in 17 there was outrage, and rightly so, from the people of Ireland, and the Religious Sisters of Charity told us they were withdrawn. So why you would be needing to meet them, as my colleague has said, is beyond me, because they've withdrawn out of it, and fair play to them, they said they withdrew out of it. And then in May 20 they tell us they gave the site as a gift to the people of Ireland. That now is also not accurate, and we know it went to, or is going to, a specially set up company. In between, of course, we've had so many things. We must remember that St Vincent's rejected the co-location. They were totally against it in 2014, and obviously what proceeded in that manner with the collusion of different governments who sought to facilitate that situation where there wouldn't really be co-ownership but a taking over of the hospital. And in between, thanks to Dr. Peter Boylan, thanks to ourselves, thanks to the Social Democrats, different facts have emerged. And I want to thank Dr. Peter Boylan for his effort. It cannot have been easy for him, and it is not easy for him, and he has still persisted. And he asked a very specific question in relation to the legal arrangements, and he was told they were complex. They were complex. I have to finish, unfortunately. I finish on time, as I'm always given out. I have no hesitation in supporting the motion today, but I want to see, Minister, is action from yourselves. I want no more patronising comments, no more promises.
I now call Minister Butler on behalf of Government. 10 minutes, Minister.
Garv Mahagud, Cahirlock. Cahirlock, let me thank the deputies for tabling this motion today. The contributions that deputies have brought to the topic is testament to how critically important the new National Maternity Hospital is. When I spoke on the topic of maternity services recently, I noted how the attention and investment in those services is commensurate with the importance that we, as a society, place on women and babies. I reaffirm the commitment of this government to delivering better health outcomes for the women of Ireland, as well as our determination to ensure that the success achieved so far in women's health is built on for generations of Irish women and girls into the future. What we are talking about here today is a huge part of that ongoing work. It is worth remembering, Cahirlock, that the new National Maternity Hospital will be the single greatest investment to date in maternity and women's healthcare in the history of the state. It will provide state-of-the-art facilities for the provision of modern healthcare for generations of women and families to come. But it is more than just a hospital. It is an investment in our services. It is an investment in the dedicated people who provide those services. But most importantly of all, Cahirlock, it is an investment for the women of this country themselves, an investment, I might add, that is long overdue. We all want to see modern, safe, compassionate services delivered with dignity and respect to those who use them. To ensure that we can deliver on that aim, the government has provided a significant increase in funding for women's healthcare in 2021, reflecting our commitment to improve services in this area. The €12 million that has been allocated to the National Maternity Strategy and to gynaecology services this year, and the additional €5 million provided to the Women's Health Task Force, will ensure that there is a renewed focus on delivering the best possible care for women and babies across the country. I can reassure the deputies that delivered improved outcomes for women will remain our core aim. The National Maternity Hospital's move as planned to the Ellen Park campus is a key part of achieving that aim. The development of modern hospitals, co-located with adult teaching hospitals,
will ensure we can provide the best possible healthcare to women and babies, delivered by the right person, at the right time and in the right place. The new hospital is therefore a vital piece of infrastructure, one that will help underpin the development of maternity services and the implementation of the National Maternity Strategy into the future. We know that concerns have been raised regarding the ownership and clinical independence of the new National Maternity Hospital. These concerns are not surprising, given the checkered history of women's experience of care in this country in the past. However, as Minister Donnelly has outlined, a very considerable amount of work has been done to address these issues and to ensure that the new hospital will remain in state ownership to serve women and families for years to come. Several deputies who proposed the motion have stated that the government is gifting the hospital to the sisters. This is inaccurate, it is untrue and it is misleading. The corporate and clinical governance arrangements for the new maternity hospital are set out in the Mulvey Agreement, which was agreed between the National Maternity Hospital and St Vincent's in 2016. A key element of that agreement and a core objective in the subsequent negotiations around the legal framework was the need for the new National Maternity Hospital to have clinical and operational, as well as financial and budgetary independence. This means that the full range of health services available at the new hospital will be provided without religious, ethnic or other distinction. As the Minister for Health stated earlier, the other core objective on this project was and remains that the state's significant investment in the new hospital must be appropriately protected. In this regard, as part of initial negotiations in 2017, the then Minister for Health sought the outright transfer of the site for the new hospital. Following extensive engagement between the HSE, the National Maternity Hospital, St Vincent's Healthcare Group and the Department, the current position is that St Vincent's Healthcare Group has agreed to lease the site to the state for a period of 99 years. There is the potential to extend the lease for a further 50 years. And once again, I would like to reiterate, lest there be any confusion, the Government nor the Minister will not be gifting the National Maternity Hospital to anyone. And I think language is extremely important here. The finalisation of the draft legal framework and associated arrangements is still ongoing, with a view to ensuring that the safeguarding of women's healthcare services and the state's investment is affirmed beyond doubt for the public and for women in Ireland. In terms of the governance of the new hospital, as set out in the Mulvey Agreement, a new company, the National Maternity Hospital at Ellen Park, designated activity company, will be established, which will operate the hospital under licence from the state. The Minister has received assurances that the positions on the board will be filled based solely on competency. Furthermore, in addition to the 4 directors nominated by the National Maternity Hospital and St Vincent's Healthcare Group respectively, the Minister will also nominate a public interest representative to the board. The Religious Sisters of Charity will not have any role in the governance, the operation of the new National Maternity Hospital. Minister Donnelly has been absolutely clear about this previously and clarified the situation once again today. The sisters have resigned from St Vincent's Healthcare Group Board and will be transferring their shareholding to St Vincent's Holdings CLG. It is also clear that the Constitution of St Vincent's Holdings CLG makes no reference to canon law, and that canon law will have no impact in terms of the provision of care at the new hospital. I would like to conclude by reiterating to the House that this government remains fully committed to its focus on the development of maternity and women's health services in this country. We are investing more in these services to ensure developments are achieved, improvements are made, and outcomes for people using the services are enhanced. The relocation of the National Maternity Hospital is a significant part of that development. And I would just like to reiterate what Minister Donnelly said. He will not countenance developing any new maternity hospital where there is any risk that religious or other influence would put women's reproductive health care at risk or endanger their safety. This is an absolute commitment from Minister Donnelly on the floor of this House. He can assure deputies that the clear legal advice provided to the state is that the ownership, the clinical governance and the corporate governance structures ensure that all legally permissible medical services will be provided in the new hospital. And Cathaoirleach, I just want to respond to an accusation that was made here earlier. And in case there is any concern that was raised by Deputy O'Reilly, the Fianna Fáil party fully supports the National Maternity Hospital to be built on public land in state ownership. And Minister Donnelly has the full support of the Fianna Fáil party on this. However, I do believe language is important, and I do believe any attempt to demonise the Catholic faith for political gain is unnecessary and disappointing. But unfortunately, we have seen this happen more and more recently. The Minister and the Government remain committed to progressing this critical project and to provide the highest quality infrastructure and environment with all of the necessary assurances to enable the delivery of modern, safe, quality health services for women and babies for many years to come. Gaurav Mahagut.
Thank you very much, Minister. We now move to Social Democrats' reply. Deputy Gannon, I believe you're sharing your time with Deputy Shortall. 10 minutes, Deputy. Thank you.
Kia ora Maragu, Cathaoirleach. Cathaoirleach, I want to begin by bringing into the chamber the words of American poet, feminist and lesbian activist Adrienne Rich, who said that every built thing has its unmeant purpose. It should be a source of celebration that the Irish state and the Irish people should be getting a modern maternity hospital, free of Nightingale wards, single room occupancy, the fact that hundreds of millions will be spent to provide the absolute highest standard of healthcare should be a cause of celebration in a modern republic. And yet the dark clouds of an old Ireland once again start to gather, because we will not own that hospital. We will not own the site in which it's built on. Rather, the hospital will be owned by the St Vincent's Hospital Group, who have been set up by the Sisters of Charity, who, in my constituency in Dublin Central, their legacy is very clear. You can walk up the road from this convention centre up to Shamrock-Dermot Street and you'll see a big, big building there where they once incarcerated women who committed no crime, which is the legacy I see when I walk through my constituency of the Sisters of Charity. And those same people want us to believe that their control of that hospital will be benign, that they will have a hands-off approach for 99 years, that they won't get involved, that they won't dictate in any manner. And they have provided assurances. And I have no faith in their assurances. The people of this country who have suffered at the hands of such organisations have no faith in their assurances. And that's why we stand here today and bring forward this motion that our national maternity hospital should be publicly owned on public lands, providing the highest standard of healthcare to women and people in this country without any risk of ethos interfering in the treatment that they be given at any point in the future. We need this hospital so badly. The people of this country need our maternity hospital so badly, and that very fact is being weaponised. Every built thing has its unmeant purpose. And for the St Vincent's Hospital Group or the Sisters of Charity or for the hierarchy of the Catholic Church in terms of the answer to the unmeant purpose is very clear. It's about control. It's about this. It's about the long game. It's the fact that they with the long game of Catholic control that they will not concede in this country, the dark shadow that they still want not unflinch their grip from. And that's not a demonisation of people of the Catholic faith in this country. Let me be very clear. The people of the Catholic faith in this country suffered more at the hands of the hierarchy than absolutely anybody else. A lease of 99 years is nothing to an organisation that existed for thousands of years. There is a battle for our national maternity hospital, but also one that strikes at the very heart of what it means to live in a modern, secular republic. And we have fought too hard to concede an inch here. I stood at doors, like many people in my generation, with women who had to knock door to door to door, outlining their stories, outlining their hurts and their grievances, just to get access to basic health care. Before that, I stood at door with people from LGBT community who went door to door to door again, asking for the state to provide for them to be able to marry the people they loved. When we done that, we stood on the shoulders of people who came before us, who suffered a substantial oppression and showed courage beyond what they should have had to do in terms of contraceptive trains, in terms of those who were incarcerated in Magdalen laundries, who suffered the horrors of the asylums, who were kept in mother and baby homes. Those legacies are still there. That pain is still there, and we will not concede. Do we honestly believe that given half the chance, the hierarchy of the church would not do the exact same thing again? And to those naive enough to believe that, I point you in the direction of Poland. I point you, actually bring it forward at the home, bring it to our schools. We talk, the deputy talked about being a cold place for those of the Catholic faith in this country. Go into any school, any school in this country. 1 in 5 teachers of the LGBT community cannot profess the manner in which the person they love, for fear that it would prohibit their careers advancements. This has been a cold, dark place for people of the LGBT community, and that ethos still very much exists in our schools, and we will not be fooled into believing that it won't exist in our hospitals, giving them half the chance. So no, we stand wholly against it. And Minister, I ask you to demonstrate courage that's expected. When you walk into the rooms with the Sisters of Charity, you should not be deferential in that room. We owe them absolutely nothing. Nothing. The history of this country is 90 years of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael conceding ownership of public services, basic public amenities of healthcare, education to the church, and absolutely no more will we stand for that. When you walk into that room, do not be deferential. Remember who you're talking to, and remember the legacy that they've inflicted, the legacy of hurt, pain and trauma that is still being inflicted and still experienced with people in this country today.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Shortall, please.
Cathaoirleach, I want to thank all members who contributed to this debate. I also want to thank the cross-party Oireachtas group, which was formed last month, for helping to put this issue centre stage in politics. I wish to acknowledge and thank Dr. Peter Boylan for the important role that he has played and the assistance he's provided. He's been a tireless advocate for women's health care. I also want to thank and acknowledge the role of the Campaign Against Church Control of Women's Health Care, as well as the National Women's Council, for their help and their campaigning on this vital issue. These and other efforts have resulted in some in government now belatedly sitting up, taking notice and facing up to the fact that what is proposed for the new National Maternity Hospital is simply not acceptable. It is not acceptable because it fails to protect the public purse. It fails to achieve public ownership and governance. It fails to guarantee the full range of women's healthcare services, and it ignores the strong public demand to separate church and state. St Vincent's, in a statement yesterday, made a number of claims, some of which are simply untrue and do not stand up to any kind of scrutiny. Their claim that it was imperative that they retained ownership of the site for the delivery of integrated patient care at Ellen Park is nonsensical. I must say the comments and the contribution from the Minister for Health this morning has been extremely disappointing. He continues to be in denial and seems to think that he can hide behind the phrase that it is my preference. He needs to spell out exactly what he will do to address this mess before us and the very fundamental issues which are at its core. He must address ownership of the site, but he must also address the issue of ownership of the National Maternity Hospital Company. It cannot become a mere subsidiary of St Vincent's, a wholly owned company, wholly owned by St Vincent's, because that is what is proposed in Mulvey. Mulvey is the problem. Minister, Mulvey is not the solution. The National Maternity Hospital must be publicly owned and governed. It must be a public hospital. And I'm today calling on the Minister to bring proposals for the future much-needed National Maternity Hospital to this Dáil for debate prior to the Government signing off on any proposals. It's the least that we deserve. I've talked earlier about issues of ownership, property, money, issues that arose with St Vincent's in the 70s. I could also have talked about similar issues in the 90s, when St Vincent's mortgaged the public hospital to fund their private hospital. An issue that has created a really toxic public-private mix and all of what goes with that. The nuns understood the importance of ownership and control of their own hospitals since the 1930s. Why has our government in 2021 failed to learn that fundamental lesson? This has gone on long enough. It must stop now, not just for us, but for future generations of Irish women. The government has said it will not oppose our motion. That is not enough, Minister. It is not enough, Taoiseach. This government must actively support the principles of this motion and make a solemn promise to the people of Ireland. That promise must be that you will not give away ownership or control of another hospital. Nothing else will suffice. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you very much, Deputy Shortall. Now that completes our debate on the motion regarding the National Maternity Hospital. Amendment number 1 has been submitted in the name of Deputy Tobin. Does Deputy Tobin wish to move that amendment?
I wish to move.
You move. Okay. Therefore, our first question is that the amendment be made. Is that agreed?
Tá.
Neil.
Neil. Na teachtaí tar héifna tariscina aber dis tá. Enya tá na cuine aber dis Neil.
Neil.
Is Loilim Gwilin Kestrich. I believe the question is carried.
Vote all.
Is that vote all?
Vote all, yeah.
Vote all. Insofar as a vote has been called, it is deferred until division time later today.